Hey there, welcome to the House Music Connection podcast. I'm your host, Tony Fuel. Each week, I have a conversation with a different artist where we discuss personal stories, challenges, successes, production process, and more. Ultimately, the goal is for all of us to feel a greater sense of connection to the house music community and to one another. So let's get right into the conversation. Carlos Ruiz of New York City, welcome to the House Music Connection podcast. I'm really glad that you have joined our audience today. And to start things off, why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thanks, man. It's great to see you, Tony. I am Carlos Ruiz. I'm audio engineer, DJ based out of New York City, and been in the scene for, it's been, I guess, like over 20 years now, and just kind of floating around different aspects of it for the entire time I've been really into this music, from clubber to, I guess, label owner, producer, now mostly engineer sort of thing. So, yeah, in a nutshell, I would say that's me.
Yeah, very cool. So just to kind of like break the ice a little bit and let listeners get to know you, I imagine that you probably have a day job as well. So, I mean, we'll talk about your mix engineering in a little bit, but just what's your day job?
I work in the energy industry, like on the retail side. I've actually been in that industry since I was like, I guess, 23, 24 years old. Funny enough, I went to school for audio engineering, and, just trying to like get my feet wet in that world. And then around the time that I was finishing these classes that I was taking, it was like the point where all the recording studios were shutting down because home recording was becoming like a thing, and a lot of rooms were just shutting down left and right. So I remember going back to school to just get some like skill sets, and I remember, just doing like basic like web design and office, training courses and things like that. And I just kind of fell into that industry. I was like working as a temp as a receptionist, and this person that was working with me allowed me to kind of just build up my career in there. Now I'm sort of in the operations billing side of it, doing that sort of thing during the day. Yeah, fighting crime at night, that sort of thing.
So it sounds like you worked your way up kind of through your career path. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. So, all right, so you're on the operations side. That's cool. I wonder, do you apply any of your operations skills to how you run your artistry or your mix engineering business?
Yeah, I do actually. From like keeping a spreadsheet of what I have to invoice, right? To how you communicate with clients and things like that. All those skill sets are very much present on an everyday basis, whether I'm at my 9 to 5 or I'm doing the audio engineering thing. And I try to apply some level of creativity even on the operation side, because that's just who I am, right? So kind of keep that morale up. I feel like if I wouldn't be like at least somewhat creative at work, I'd be completely miserable. So like even if it's creating a spreadsheet that alleviates me from maybe 10 steps of manual work, that to me is some level of creativity. That satisfies that part of me, I guess, on an everyday basis. But yeah, I see parallels between my day job skills and the stuff I apply to in audio engineering for sure. I'm definitely not doing mixing in my day job, but there's definitely stuff that I feel like I still apply mentally. Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like you have some systems, for doing like, your audio engineering and whatnot. That's cool. So I think a lot of times we like as creative people, we sometimes underestimate like how systems can like kind of help us with being more creative sometimes, because we have
absolutely
all of our like admin stuff taken care of. It gives us more mental energy for being creative and coming up with new things and whatnot. And I like that you said that it's kind of creative to come up with like different systems for doing things, because it's really just design, right? It's just taking different elements of what's already there and rearranging it in a different way, which is what we do as musicians. So That's cool. I love it.
Yeah.
So, what, I guess, what was your introduction to house music?
My first introduction to house music was a couple of the clubs at first that my friends took me to, like Exit, Tunnel. Those are the first, like Limelight. At first, I didn't necessarily, the particular nights that they took me to, I wasn't necessarily into them. I didn't like the music. So it didn't really speak to me at the time. I was still coming out of that, big into like, grunge, alternative rock, and hip hop, and all sorts of stuff like that. But then one night, against my will, my friend took me to Be Yourself at Vinyl. It was about like 99, I would say. And it was just when he was starting the party, I remember. It could have been even like 98, 99. And I remember just being completely blown away because the stuff that he was playing was more like, kind of B-side-ish, I would say. Like, it wasn't all vocals all night. There was a lot of like, different genres being played, a lot of different grooves, it almost felt like an emotional roller coaster, and like with energy, the way he would just kind of dictate the nights. And I remember leaving that night being completely inspired and just wanting to go to the nearest record shop and, find some of these records that he was playing. And that's kind of when I started to get, I guess, sort of indoctrinated into the world of DJs and like, who they are and who these producers are making the records and the labels. Like it was kind of a downward spiral after I went to that night. That was yeah. What about you though? I don't know like what your night was. What was the night that blew you away? Because I remember hearing that one.
I haven't really been interviewed yet, so maybe on a future episode I'll be the one being interviewed, but maybe at like episode 50 or something. I don't know, but I don't know. It was like so the thing is, my introduction to dance music was through radio, actually, and I love dance music because in Seattle we had this dance music radio station run out of a high school, and it's actually still going, and it's one of the most influential dance music stations in the country, or maybe even the world.
Oh, that's awesome!
And yeah, it's all dance music, and it's always been all dance music, and so I think that it was that. I don't know. I'd have to think about that a little bit more and like piece together the timeline, because it's all kind of a little bit of a blur at this point in my life, because I'm in my 40s.
Yeah,
and yeah, it's a little bit faded, but I don't know. I think it was because of dance music being on that radio station, and then also it was because like dance music was really kind of coming into the forefront in that 90s period and whatnot, and so you had to, I don't know, even if you were listening to just mainstream radio, there were still some mainstream songs on there that were dance music, and I just loved the dance music. And then also, I do remember going to clubs and, because in Washington State you have to be 21 to drink. Well, I mean, in the United States now, everywhere it's 21 to drink, but there were some 18 and over nightclubs that were like just 18 and over, and so and then there was like this one in Portland that was like 16 and over, and so I drive from Seattle to go to Portland to go to this nightclub, or like when I turned 18, I would go to this a few nightclubs in Seattle, and so it was really just kind of like I don't know, I don't remember a single night or a single instance. It was just more of like a gradual phase or whatever.
That's
and then
awesome.
I really got into and then I really got into like deep house in like the early 2000s, and that's when I really started like when I got that more of that underground. And I had always liked vocals, like a lot of vocals early on, but then I didn't really get like the whole like dub side thing. Like I mean, this is just just music. I mean, this is just music, no words or no lyrics. But then it wasn't until later when I kind of let myself go and like freed my mind a little bit more that I was like, okay, I get it now.
Yeah,
also like
I think it's like a gradual thing, right? Like it's because I remember the same thing. I remember, like I said, like getting into the more commercial side of things in certain club nights that I went to. And like to your point, the night that I fell in love with house music, that was an 18 overnight because they didn't serve alcohol, funny enough. So, when you were there, and you were committed to pretty much the music because it wasn't like you were getting a beer at the bar. I'm sure other things are going on out there, but you know the deal. And I don't know. It's just like it was a mixture of like the deep, the soulful, the funk, the dark, the tech. And I was getting that in one night. I felt very spoiled after a while when I started going to other clubs and realizing not every night is like that. You're not getting all of that in one DJ set sometimes. And that's kind of why I fell in love with, Tenaglia particularly and DJs like that of his, of that caliber who mix it up. The Ted Pattersons, the Francois K's, and the Louis Vegas. Those were like some of the biggest residencies at the time. Some of them were actually playing in that same club. Like Vinyl had Louis Vega on Wednesdays. They had Body and Soul on Sundays. They had Danny on Friday, and then they had like an international night on Saturdays. So that means like you could get anyone from Danny Howells to like a Steve Lawler or a Peace Division even. Like it was very broad, the bookings in that one venue. So it was interesting. And then because they didn't serve alcohol, I was able to take advantage of that at that young period of time in my life, because there was some clubs I just couldn't get into because, like you said, the 21 and over requirement. So, if you didn't have that fake ID that would fool the bouncer, which most of them didn't, I mean, you were pretty much screwed. So, unless you knew somebody. I know my sister every once in a while snuck me in, but that was rare. But yeah, that was my introduction to dance music. And it was such a scene too, because I remember leaving that club and meeting a couple of people that night, and they were telling me about these record shops that they would go to, and they were going to go get breakfast. It was like 10:30, 11 when we left the club, like in the afternoon the next day. And I remember just like tagging along with them, going and discovering what was Satellite Records at the time, and just like being completely blown away by like holy shit, this music is actually on vinyl. Like at first I was just thinking maybe it's just all on CDs, like everything else was being moved towards that direction at that time, and then heading in the digital direction, and then to see like the whole scene was really built on vinyl records at the time. I was just kind of blown away, because it sounded so futuristic on this really dated format. The contrast to that always, like, I always associated vinyl records with my aunt's like disco records and classic rock records. So to see like the newest, like Junior Vasquez remix on a vinyl record, I was like, holy shit, this is awesome. I didn't realize it, because again, I was coming from the commercial scene, so yeah.
And you mentioned, and like it's funny because like vinyl records now like outsell CDs, and it's like the best-selling media or format right now, like physical media format. So yeah, it's awesome. It's just stood the test of time.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
And it's still kind of the most fun to play, right? Like I've done the CDs, I still do digital, and I love it, right? I wouldn't trade it and go back only, right? I love the different formats that we're able to play in, but I do feel like that tactile connection that you have with playing a record, dropping the needle, even the elements affecting it, right? Like dust and, even the wind blowing the needle, like, these things are what kind of add to the mystique of and enjoyment of playing records, kind of like a battle with yourself in a way. The way we DJ now, it's like sometimes, I just miss that connection. It's not worse or anything. It's just different. That's all.
It's totally different. Yeah. Having the feel of that, when you're like launching that record for the
exactly. Or even like I remember, like, if you were standing by the DJ booth, right, and you saw somebody's record box, you could see some of the labels, kind of get an idea of like what kind of stuff they were playing. You know what I mean? You can't get that now from like somebody's like USB, but you could definitely see somebody's slip mat of like a Twisted record and be like, oh, that's and then recognize that in the record shop if you ever go back and get some records. There's elements of that I feel are still sort of precious to the whole culture, and that's why it's still very much present. And also some of the records that now are coming out on vinyl, you can't get digitally. Like some labels have been committed to the idea that this will only exist on vinyl for this release. And, sometimes they eventually print a year or two later on, digital, they'll release it on digital. But for the most part, there's a ton of records that I hear some great local DJs playing that I've never heard on the shops because I would have bought it. So it's like, wow, where are you getting this stuff? And of course, when I look at the, the booth, they're playing a record. And I'm like, of course, And I'm not sure if it's old or new, who knows? But it's on record, and it sounds great. So, it's still very much relevant, and probably even more so than ever before.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't bought vinyl in a while, or I haven't spun vinyl in a while, but I still buy records every once in a while to for that, someday if I ever get turntables again.
Yeah. Actually, it's funny you say that, because I had to get rid of my turntables a while back, right, when I was moving around and stuff like that, and it just becomes a hassle, especially with the collection. And eventually I got back into it, and I was buying records well before I had the turntable. And eventually my girlfriend, Chris, she was just like, you need a turntable, and she got me one for Christmas. And now it's just been like, I'm getting that vinyl addiction again, where you just find yourself in a record shop buying a couple of records you probably don't need, but you want them because you have the turntable. So that's where I'm at right now.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool that just sounds amazing that she supports that. And
yeah, she's amazing. I mean, to allow me to have an entire room dedicated in the apartment, in New York City is,
Yeah. Nice. I love it. Okay. So let's see. At that time where you were discovering house music, had you already gone to audio engineering school, or was that later?
That was a little later. So funny enough, I got into the audio stuff a little bit before the clubbing thing, but that was through my sister. She was working for a company, AMS Neve, which you of course know now as Neve. It's Rupert Neve's first company that he had, and they made those mixing boards and delay units and reverb units and all that stuff. She was actually working in the offices here in New York City on 6th Ave, and she brought me to her office one day, and I was blown away. And one of the guys on the computer was actually playing with an early version of Redrum, or I forgot what it's called. It's Recycle. It was made by Propellerhead. Eventually, it would turn into what we know as now as Reason. And then they had that, and they had Pro Tools, and the guy there gave me a copy of both. And I remember going home, just being completely just blown away that I was able to make some sounds in a computer, because I was already into computers, and I was very much into music, but there was no bridging the two at the time. As back in the day, it was like tape and hard, old school style recording. So when I saw that, it was kind of like that, the birth of the new age of digital recording. So that's kind of what my first introduction to it. And then when I started hearing these records in the clubs that Danny was playing, that's what really inspired me to be like, wow, I got to learn how to make this stuff. I want to participate. I want to try to get the ideas that I'm starting to hear in my head out. And that at the time I was starting to meet other people who were also getting into it and starting to get inspired by the same person and going on their own sort of journey of trying to learn audio. Because, back then we didn't have YouTube, right? It wasn't like we had, just a quick source that you could just get information from at the time. It was, you had to get handbooks. You needed to know somebody who had a piece of equipment that you could try and test. And, it was brutal.
It was a lot more involved.
Yeah. And even if you had a computer that had this stuff, they would crap out. I mean, I can't tell you how many sessions would just crash on me in the middle of recording or doing something important for the song, I think about those days. But that's where I got started. So I would say it sort of, the training, I went to Cutting Room Studios. I first went to IAR, and I spent a solid 2 months there, and I fucking hated it. Because they were just having us open up units and learn electrical circuits and all this stuff that I probably should have learned now that I got into hardware. But back then I did not imagine myself ever getting into hardware. So I was just like, this is unnecessary. I wanted to learn MIDI. I wanted to learn, just signal flow and how to just, get sounds out and get sounds in. That's it, So I dropped out of that school and I enrolled in a summer program at the Cutting Room Studios. And it was every weekend from Saturday and Sunday from 6 in the morning till about like 12, 1. Usually when the first session that day started, that's when they would kick us out. And they taught us like signal flow, recording instruments, microphones, preamps, how to use the SSL board. I think they had a 4000K E, if I'm not mistaken. So I learned the board there, how to run the automation, and then of course Pro Tools, which was now starting to become the sort of the default method of working in the recording studio. It was, the tape machines were still very much there in that room, and they showed us how to cut out tape. And I swear to you, I would never want to do that. But, it's a painstaking process, a 4-bar loop cut. I remember them showing us. It took about 40 minutes. That one thing takes you about 2 seconds now in the computer. You know what I mean? So, but I thought it was a pretty valuable lesson, but yeah, that's where I got my introduction and all that stuff. And what inspired me was going to the club those nights because I wanted to try to make that music.
Yeah. When you talk about all that hardware and just the tedious nature of making music back then, I'm just amazed still. I mean, it wasn't even that long ago, and it's changed so much in the last 20 years. I mean, even in the last 10 years, it's changed a lot. And it's good because everyone can make music now, but then really the challenge now is to cut through all that noise and to be able to make your music stand out from everybody else's. I don't know. I think it's a new challenge now.
Yeah, but I have to admit though, if you think about historically speaking, how we've made music, music has always followed the technological advancements of the times. And so I've always felt like music has always been in a state of flux and, evolution. If you think about it, we went from the gramophone to, an actual regular turntable, and that actually then connects to a speaker. And, there's been sort of evolutions to that. And then even then from that method to multi-track recording, going from old school tape to digital, and then going from tape to in the computer, and now from the computer into our iPads and our phones. It just seems to always have been constantly evolving alongside, I guess, humanity in a way. So I kind of look at it you're an IT specialist. You kind of have to keep up with it to sort of continue down learning and doing your thing, because these tools continue to evolve, and so do our the way we listen and the way we approach things. I mean, now we're, you have surround sound, and now it's Atmos. It's things are just evolving constantly, and now it's in our handheld phones. I mean, it's just that to me is mind blowing. So you remember when we were carrying CDs? I gotta change this album, and you listen to that album. That was now I can listen to a playlist of songs from 15,000 albums in one playlist. It's times have changed, so I would say the way we've made music has kind of always been changing with us. Even though it feels like it's sort of the same thing, because we're all throughout the time we've all tried to do the exact same thing, just with different tools and the times that we're in, basically trying to get an idea out and connect with people. So,
have you been using AI at all as part of your workflow or in any capacity with music?
I've dabbled in it with some of the tools that Isotope has been playing with, for sure. There's definitely been some advancements there. I've even messed around with the vocal thing. I tried out a demo actually just recently by Sonar Works that's doing a vocal AI where you could sort of emulate either an instrument or a human voice. It's still sort of in its infancy. I find that there's going to be really good ways to use it, and then there's just going to be really terrible ways that people will use it. And just like anything, there's going to be pros and cons. But I don't fear the disconnection of the human essence of it. I still feel like you want the human idea, that soul behind the music. I've listened to some AI generated music. It didn't connect with me. Maybe that'll change. I don't know, but it didn't really speak to me the way like, a Fiona Apple record speaks to me. I don't know. It's just different. So, but again, that's all subjective too. So,
Totally. I mean, there's like lots of human made music that I don't connect with.
Yeah, exactly. 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 So that's why I'm like, I don't know. I could see it go both ways,
Yeah. I was telling Richard Pring when we were he and I were having a conversation. I was like, it's not going to like take away that need for humans to connect in the same spot, be dancing in the same place to music, and even if I don't know, I feel like it'll drive the desire even more for like live performance, in some way, or like live music creation, just because people will want to the pendulum swings and people will want to kind of have more of that have more of a desire or an appetite for that human made, human produced, human connection element. So
I mean, but on the other side of that coin, right? Like a lot of the stuff we're doing is all synthetic. Like how many people are playing instruments on their records, right? Like we could say like, the human essence of it, but then when you think about like how much music is actually being generated from within the computer, so then is it that much different? You know what I mean? Like to me, like, that's why I feel like you could see it from so many different perspectives, and none of them are invalid, right? Like they're all valid opinions of it. I just would prefer the person hitting the MPC rather than just being generated from an algorithm. But that's just me, again, just all subjective, really.
Yeah.
But I mean, like tools like Rebalance, for instance, like on Isotope, they're using like algorithms there that if we weren't pushing the technology from the artificial intelligence side, we wouldn't have certain tools that we currently have now in the audio world. I personally feel like the things that we're able to do with records is, I mean, I would have thought was impossible 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, with some of the things that they've managed to develop. So, like I said, there's so many benefits to it, but I'm sure there's going to be a ton of shit music that people don't like from it also. So, who knows?
Yeah.
Whatever.
Well, there's a lot of crap music out there.
Anyway, right? Yep.
I don't know, according to me, but yeah. So, when did you start like really mix engineering? I mean, you mentioned school. And then you mentioned like kind of getting into that house music thing. And you DJ'd for a little bit, and feel free to back up, if you'd like. But I mean, when did you start getting into wanting mix engineering to be your career, and that you're going to do it as a business or a service for others that other people pay for?
I would say I like maybe like 6-7 years ago, I started to really take it seriously from an engineering business standpoint. And it took me a while to get comfortable with feeling okay to charge people, because at first I was definitely working off that free model just to try to get my feet wet in it. But funny enough, I was doing a lot of the mixing, for a lot of different people well before I took it like from an engineering, like took it serious from a business standpoint. Because I had started working with Rissa when we started Night Child Records around like 2007. So there was always constantly like records that we were helping people with, or working on ourselves, helping her solo stuff, and then I was doing my own solo stuff. And then it's so funny, I was looking back at like archiving a bunch of my hard drives and going back all these different years, all these projects, and I couldn't believe how much I actually had done before I said to myself, I'm a mixing engineer. And I guess like that was my way of sort of, getting to that point and learning and trial and error, because I've listened back to some of those records. They weren't my, best work. It's still when I was learning. but that's kind of, I would say I got started around then. Like when we started doing music, that's when we started doing mixing. Like our first record, we sent to a couple of different people. Like we had my good friend and I guess the closest person that I have to a mentor, Conrad Corelli. He mixed our very first record, and he's an engineer full time. Like he's done major records with like Danny Tenaglia, Ted Patterson, many other people for many labels. So he did our first record, and then our friend Marcos did another record of ours. I think he mixed a solo record for myself as well. And I started to see these people work, and I was really interested in it because that's what I was originally into, but I didn't feel comfortable doing the mixing for our own work. But then after a while, I just felt like I could do something more. I wanted to get a bit more creative. I felt like some of the mixes we were getting, and not from them too, because we worked with a bunch of other people, but some of the mixes that we started getting back from other engineers started to sound flat emotionally. And I felt like we could just do a bit more with some of the stuff that we were doing with the material that we were making. And so eventually I started to do it myself, like during the sessions of arrangement, like EQing and trying to balance things. And I started to look up, stuff in YouTube when that started to come around with Pensado's place, and eventually mix with the masters. I'm a member of that and done a bunch of courses through there. And I would say I took it serious about 6 or 7 years ago, but I was really mixing well before that. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've done some projects for me, and it's good work. So
you've given me some great tracks. So that's what helps, right? Like that. I think some people forget. Like no matter how good of a mix you do, like the song has to be good, right? It has to connect with somebody. So sometimes the best mixes it's because the idea is great and it's all there. There isn't any fat you need to cut out of it. You just gotta, don't fuck it up, basically.
Yeah. So some people kind of, not some people, but I mean like there's this concept of creative mixing that mix engineers are kind of familiar with, and I don't know if everybody really knows what creative mixing is. What would you describe creative mixing as?
That's a great question. I feel like I can answer that in so many different ways. So mixing to me, right? And this is, everybody's different. Everybody's going to have their own approach, their own answer to this question. But creative mixing to me is first kind of figuring out what the artist is trying to achieve with the song, right? And then how do you creatively extract out of that song what they want, and then take it up a notch so that they're like, blown away by, like, you were able to basically deliver what they envision. And that creativity can stem from a lot of different things. From, for instance, the way you set up your room, the artwork that you have in it. I have TV in the studio above me, so I play films and documentaries, nature documentaries, or anything visually stimulating that allows me to connect with the music even more so. I'm not listening to it; they're just muted in the background, but they're playing there, and sometimes I'm using that as a reference to sort of get ideas, and sometimes it's even like I've been given the artwork of the record before we even mixed it, and I'm using that as a visual reference. Like, oh, okay, this is the mood of the record, and then they gave me the 3 records for the EP. It's like, okay, and then how do you creatively do that? Within the mix, clever use of balance. Balance is the biggest thing, I think, right? You EQ by balance. So before you start throwing effects or anything like that, you should be able to balance and make what's just there sound great first, right? Then you can figure out what more does it need. And that could be with some reverbs, delays. It could be even editing stuff, maybe muting a part in a section that allows this other thing to sort of shine a bit more. And then when that element that you just muted comes back in the second verse, now it's like, oh, wow, like I didn't because you were just hearing it over and over again with those things together. All of that is like kind of fuels your creative approach to a mix, and there's been times where, like, I remember I was mixing one of Rissa's EPs, and I was watching Ready Player One like nonstop, every session, like just Ready Player One, because it had a frenetic tempo to it that just sort of matched what I was trying to achieve with Rissa's record. So it was like, okay, that was my visual reference. And at one point throughout the mix, I'm sitting there looking at this film, and it's kind of like moving, and the record feels like it's moving in that frenetic way too. And that to me was like, okay, I achieved that. And the inspiration was this film that I was playing. And because I'm trying to elicit, a lot of the records I'm working on are dance music, right? So I'm trying to elicit a physical response from listeners too, right? I'm trying to get you to dance. So like, how do I exaggerate these elements to the point where you just can't resist moving your shoulders or nodding your head or, just moving your hips, that, because they're meant for the dancer, right? Like, I have to sometimes remind myself that the legacy of this record is not so much like the lifetime that it has in the streaming services, but that initial time that it's released for the dance floor, So some producers don't give a shit if it doesn't sound that great on a streaming service. They just want it to sound great on the dance floor. And, so I would say like creative, mixing is like anything that could elicit a creative idea from you. And how do you apply that to the mix and take things up a notch or interpret the information that the artist is giving it to you, right? Sometimes, they don't tell you, can you raise the snare up a dB or lower the bass by 2 dB? They're telling you, I really want these shakers to sound ethereal. Like they're just shaking around me from like another planet. And you got to take that information and interpret it, and, like figure out a way to apply that and make what, he's talking about or she's talking about to sound exactly like what they just described, which may not be the technical description that you're thinking of, So to me, visual references has always been the thing like that. Even the mood in the room, how you decorate your studio, like I said before, the lighting, that's another thing too, kind of could get you in a vibe, even your like emotions on that day, sometimes could elicit some creativity from you, like anger, for instance, could be a great fuel for like mixing a techno track that's very aggressive, or, maybe you just came back from a lovely evening with your lady and now you're mixing this really beautiful soulful track and you could use those feelings that you just came from and apply that somehow, I remember actually another experience. I was mastering this great record, and it was just like a love theme record, and it was coming out on February 14th, Valentine's Day, which was obviously within theme. And I had just came back from my cousin's wedding. So I was just like, oh man, like this is great. And it was like, I get goosebumps because I was like, man, this is so perfect. I just got home. I got these vibes. I'm floating, like, like I'm riding high. Everybody's just like, loving the weekend and this incredible union. And then I got to master that record, and it just seemed like this really beautiful, perfect synergy of like what I was feeling and then what that project was about. And, it's just those things where that to me is creativity. How do you it's not just about getting creative in the box, but sort of like using the things around you to apply to the mix to raise it up the bar, so that the artist is like, wow, this is, because you gotta take it up a notch, right? Like that's why references to me is a big deal. Like they'll give you like where they left off and like, okay, how can I creatively take this up a notch? But you can't lose the plot. You could really destroy somebody's vision by thinking you're getting creative, and it's like sometimes pulling back is needed too. So you have to kind of use your discretion, and I think that comes with experience. But I feel like that creative approach to mixing can come from a lot of different places. It's just about you and your personality, I think, right? It could even be something I read, like, and then you apply that the way you apply it. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. Are there certain, like, I guess, like, you mentioned balance, but are there other techniques like reverb or like, using some more like dimensional mixing? Are those specific techniques that you feel are, I guess, could be used more creatively than other techniques, maybe, or maybe I'm completely off base. I don't know.
No, you're completely on base. Yeah, definitely. I think especially like in the dance music scene, I noticed that like we use effects, but we use effects like aggressively, right? We're not necessarily subtle about that, and I tend to listen to a lot of different music, right? And if you listen to contemporary artists, there's a lot going on, let's say on the vocal, but you won't notice it completely, right? Until you really, really, really listen. Like, and sometimes you won't even notice anyway until maybe somebody dissects it on YouTube and they play the multi-track and you're like, holy crap, like all of that is happening. I didn't even hear any of that. And so like, reverbs, filters, like sometimes it doesn't need to be a noticeable reverb. Maybe it just needs to be just a touch, and it adds a bit more depth, right? Because I like looking at things like film, right? Like you're going from a regular original scale, and I want to widen the screen. So we're talking like left and right? And I take a lot of this influence from like guys like Tom Elmhurst and people who use a lot of visual references to mix. So like let's say left and right, we're going widescreen now, right? We're widening the screen, and now we're playing with elements that you might have panned. How do I widen that a little bit without losing the center image, the strength of the center image? How do I get that vocal to be a bit up front, but you hear the depth of it behind you somewhere there? Those are reverbs, pre-delays on reverbs, slight slap delays, that are going into another reverb, right? Those are all techniques that you can now sort of, now we're thinking three-dimensional. If I take a delay and it's just a delay, then I just have the delay, right? And then the vocal, delay. But if I have the vocal that has a pre-delay and then that delay goes into a reverb, now I've created dimension, because the vocal says vocal, and then you hear the vocal, but then you hear the air of the reverb behind that. Now we have 3 dimensions. So all of that is just like techniques that you could use to your advantage to create a space that the listener is in. Sometimes I'm thinking like we're in a dance hall, right? We're in the club. I kind of want it to feel like the listener is like in it, you know what I mean, in a way. And that's how you do that sort of stuff with little techniques like that. And not everything works for every track, right? You just have to trial and error. It's like throwing paint. Like what sticks? Like, does this work? Does this not work? Does this color mix with this color? Maybe it doesn't, you know? And sometimes what you thought would work maybe is not what the artist was picturing. And they're like, can we cut down on the reverb? I like the delay, not the reverb, because that's also a taste thing too, right? But at the end of the day, all those tricks need to serve the song, right? Or the track. If it's not, that's just all fancy stuff that nobody cares about. Because when you're listening to it, nobody gives a shit that you did a delay into a reverb and did this really cool, amazing thing. True. Nobody cares about that.
They don't care about the science. They just want to hear they just
want to get to the song, And if that is what you did and it served the song well, then they're going to be like, this is amazing, But if it doesn't, then it's like, like, what are you doing here? Like, it's kind of like the I would imagine it equates to the guy in the band, the guitarist, maybe the overzealous guitarist who just squeezes in a guitar solo in between the bridge that doesn't belong there, but he just needs to show like his prowess, That's how I don't want to do that. You know what I mean? I kind of want things to just, you don't notice it just feels right, like it's flowing and it feels right. Otherwise, if it sticks out like a sore thumb, it probably is a sore thumb, So
that makes sense. Yeah. So as artists, I don't consider myself a super good mixer. I mean, I have never gotten. I took one mixing class at Point Blank Academy, and I was also working full time and trying to make music on top of that. So I probably didn't get the most out of it that I could have. But I mean, it was good. It was a good class. But I don't know. I kind of have like this. Maybe it's just like a limiting belief that I should be able to do my own mixes. Like I should be able to. If I'm a real artist, I should be able to do my own mixes. What would you say to someone who is kind of struggling with that a little bit? Like if I hire someone else out to do my mix, do I lose my artistic integrity? Like what's something? What is your point of view on that?
Oh, I mean, it's tough, right? Because I personally feel like mixing especially when it comes to dance music, is a part of the production, right? Like you are doing some level of mixing, so you're balancing your track, you're adding delays, you're adding reverbs, you know, you're editing, you're doing all sorts of stuff, right? You're getting it to the point where you could play out. I personally believe that it's a part of just everyday production, right? And if you could get better and better at that, you should 100%, right? Yeah. It'll also be easier on your pocket, right? Because you know, I charge, right? Like it's just a reality of it. But I personally think that everybody should learn. If you're doing production, you should try to learn as much as you can. And you know, some people are not interested. Like you know, Rissa, like, you know, my best friend, who was like probably my most you know, consistent client. Like she couldn't care less about learning how to mix. She just doesn't. She doesn't want to, you know. And I always show her, like, yo, check this out. This is what I did. She's like, yo, that's awesome. But she's like, you know, like, this is why I send it to you, you know. And but then there are other people who I've worked with who I could tell they're trying to learn it, you know. And you know, I try to do my best to help people, you know, as much as I can. I know there have been people who have asked me to teach as well, and it becomes hard because at this point, I've gotten to a point where I work so fast that to slow down and teach would slow down the process, and it might actually have a negative impact on the mix. So I typically like to have people come to the studio, and then I show them what I did in the mix afterwards, so we're not slowing down the creative process of it. But I do think that it's an essential thing that most people are doing without even noticing it. You know, that vocal you're compressing, that drum that you're, you know, compressing and saturating, that's mixing. Those are all aspects of mixing, you know. And I will say though that the difference is that I have a room with, you know, that's tuned, and I'm using very expensive monitoring, and you know, it's a little different, and then I have the years of experience, you know. So those are the things that you're really paying for. All this other shit behind me and all that stuff, that you could do that in the computer, right? Like you could have a massive passive EQ in your UAD setup. You know, you don't need my hardware, you know. So I would say those are the differences. But you know, I've heard some incredible tracks from people who are doing all their own mixes, straight up, all in the box in the same session, which to me is crazy because I don't know how anyone like produces a session and then like mixes it in the same one. I do not work like that. My brain just cannot operate like that. Rissa could do that. She'll just send me a session. She'll be like, here we go. This is, and I have to like remove it. Like I have to move that into my own thing, you know? But I personally think that that's an important aspect of it. And I don't blame anyone for whatever route that they choose, honestly, because it could be a slew of different things. It could be budget. It could be, you know, maybe they want to do their own thing. They want ownership, that they did everything. I programmed, I wrote, I mixed, I mastered. Like, I respect that. That's how I got to where I'm at, right? I eventually wanted to do it on my own, even though I had friends and people who were doing it. I was like, I want to learn it, you know? So yeah.
Yeah, whenever I've sent tracks to you, it's because I've gotten to like the point that the best that I can possibly get it with my own skill, with the skills I already have. But then I'm like, I need another set of ears on this and whatnot. So that's really the, you're right. We should be learning. We should be doing mixing, and we're already doing mixing, but we should learn how to make our mixes better, and that's just part of the production skills. So
because even me, like,
that makes sense to me.
When I work on my own stuff, like I send it to a guy named Rob Small for mastering. Like, and people are like, oh, like, you don't master your own shit. And like, no, I want another set of ears on this record. So he's a guy that we've used many times. Why not go to him? And so then I compare my masters to him, and I now have information like, wow, this is where he's at. This is great. Like, you know, where am I at in comparison to that? You know, that's how you learn. Like, I'm not the end all be all. I'm still very much learning all the time, you know? So I'm still very much a student in this. And so I take lessons away from people all the time. I mean, man, I can't tell you, when I worked on a record with Ted Patterson, I made the most minute little change on an EQ frequency on one sound. Nobody would ever know, like, outside of him. But that man knew exactly what I did and he even pinpointed, like, you know, like how much, almost like to the number. He was like, did you lower that by like around 3-4K. Did you load that by DB in the sound? My mind was blown because I was like, wow, that guy is like detailed.
That's the golden ears,
right? Yeah. So like that was a learning lesson too. You got to be very detailed in what you're doing, like, you know, because, you know, these people have been listening and living with these records, right? Like, so, you know, that's the other thing too. That's why I feel like it's crucial for you to mix a bit of your records to get a feel of like where you want it to end up, how you want it to sound. And it's all an aspect of production, in my opinion. So yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, cool. So let's see. All right, let's get a little bit deep.
Yeah.
So what are some of the biggest struggles that you've faced, or some of the biggest lessons that you've learned throughout, you know, your music career?
Collaboration is key. And being open to ideas, you know, being friendly and knowing how to read a room and communicate with people, I think is like probably more than half the battle that a lot of people kind of struggle with in the scene. I've had miscommunications with people too, where it leads to maybe the project not ending up the way it was supposed to end up, or, you know, also, like, you know, the balancing act of, you know, expending your energy from a 9 to 5, then moving over to your night job, like almost an hour or two later after
the struggle is real.
Yeah. So sure. That could be a mental strain at times. You know, like, I know these past couple of weeks, I've sort of had to take a bit of a break. You know, I've only chose to take on a certain number of projects because I really needed a break, you know, and just to disconnect, because I had just recently started a new job, and, you know, things were starting to pick up there. And so, like, you know, by the time I was disconnecting and ready to mix, I'm emotionally drained. You know what I mean? I was just like, I can't. And then on that day, I can't do it because I know I'm not going to be my 100% best. So that, I would say, those are struggles. You know, when I did the label thing, you know, that's it's a pretty full-time job when you're trying to do it the right way, you know, and, you know, I don't think I did it the best way. You know, I was learning myself, you know, because I did the night child thing with Rissa, right? And then eventually, you know, she took that over and kind of just made it what it is now. And, you know, but eventually I got back into the idea of doing another label, but more low key, you know, something, you know, that's why I called it Whatever. But again, the struggle of trying to manage that, then trying to do the engineering thing, and then trying to do the DJing gig thing, you know, because if you're trying to play gigs, you know, you got to sort of hustle a little bit, go out there, and then you're buying records and all that stuff. So all of this stuff becomes sort of like time consuming. And, you know, if you're in a relationship too, you know, that could sometimes have a bit of a, you know, pulls you away from that. So I would say the everyday struggle is pretty much what I've gone through. You know, in the engineering world, like I said, it's like communication, maybe like, you know, missing out on a gig because you didn't translate the information right, or misread, you know, whatever it was that you were working on, something like that. But I think like the balancing act of, you know, your day job and your passion night pursuit, you know, that's my biggest, I guess, struggle, I would say.
Yeah. So what are some tactics? I mean, we're all still working on that and trying to get that, but so what are some tactics that you use or have learned to make that balance a little less, I don't know, friction?
So I've basically, I will disconnect very, like, on a certain time. I'm done at my job during the day, and then I usually just try to sort of disconnect on the sofa, not look at a computer. Sometimes I even try to stay away from my phone, even though it's tough, and sometimes even take a quick nap just to sort of like have a reset, like, you know, and then by like 6:37, I'm in the studio and I feel great and I feel refreshed and I'm ready to go. And that's usually how I balance that. You know, doing other things too. Like, I play a lot of hockey. Having some physical activity is a really good thing too. You know, being stuck on because think about it, we're on a computer all day at work, unless I don't know what you do during work, but for me, it's computer all day. And then I'm back on another fucking computer. So it's like, I'm just sitting in this static position like throughout the entire day. So, walks, like in between work, the day and the night job, I'll even sometimes take a walk outside. We have a park. And I'll just take a nice walk, disconnect. Like, it's just really just to reset the brain from being like on the computer and staring at a screen, which is what I'm about to do for another 5 to 6 hours, right? Because I'll start a mix from 7, and if it's a mix, I'll probably be done by like 11:30, 12, and then I'll be printing stuff into the night, so I'm not getting to bed till like 1, right? And then I'm doing that all over again with the screen, staring at Excel, and then going back into Pro Tools. It's like, so I think like the biggest thing is to figure out a way to like break that sort of that monotony up a bit, and sort of do something physical, or just take a quick nap to decompress if you feel a little overwhelmed. But I would say those are the biggest things. Physical activity, or maybe a quick nap in between. To balance it out. Or sometimes even if it's not the day to do something in the studio, don't go in that day, just maybe use that day to take it easy and save it for the next day, Sometimes timing is everything.
I love it. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, that's really good advice. So what have been some of the highlight reels of your, I guess, time in music?
Oh, man. Working with Ted Patterson was definitely one of them. He's a guy I used to go see play for years at Cielo. He was one of my favorite, still is one of my favorite DJs. So working with him was really incredible. And that record that he did for Ultra Nate and allowing me to assist him on it. Quite frankly, he doesn't really need anyone's assistance. He's incredible on his own, honestly. Like, those sessions, like I said, some people are just, your job is not to fuck up. He was definitely one of them. It wasn't too much that record really needed. But it was great working with him. All this achievements that I feel like I've had with Rissa, because we came up together. That's like my sister. So, that like she just recently had her first vinyl release, a remix that she did. That to me was quite special, like, because I can't tell you how many times like me and that girl were like playing records and just like, man, this is amazing. Like, imagine if one day we get our name on a record, so like to have that happen, that was like a pretty amazing achievement, and to have that happen with like such a close friend who's like family to me, that makes it really special. And then working with her for like we helped Danny out with auction recently for his recording studio equipment that he was selling. We got to go to his house, and it was just like going to a museum of your hero. Like, we were in like his vault, which he had pretty much all his stuff in, and I was basically testing and just doing some research and for value and all that good stuff for the auction. And it was, I swear, I had to like pinch myself. I was like there taking pictures like I was in a museum, like you would normally do in like a painting, and like, oh my God, it's my favorite artist, take a picture. That's literally what I was doing in this vault, because he had his Dance Star Awards and his Grammy nomination plaque, and just all these record things that I remember seeing. His reels of Music Is the Answer, and then just talking to him a little bit. It's that was a pretty cool achievement. Things like that. I mean, like, with audio engineering, the thing is that like it's not necessarily your achievement, right? Like, these things are like you're helping people with their achievements, right? So, and I think like it's important for people to understand that, because I've seen certain people who are dabbling in engineering, but they kind of sometimes almost take ownership of the project more so than the actual artist that they're working with. And that sometimes could be because of that person's personality, not so much that the artist wants that, and so I try to, stay very cognizant of the fact that like, hey, these are other people's projects. I was just lucky enough to help them on that. And, the fact that, they achieve something with that, and I maybe get to share a 0.5%, of that, great, but at the end of the day, like, things, you work on things from a, a client, audio engineer perspective, and then those things go on, and because the artist has to live with that, right? That's the other thing too. It's like, they have to be happy with this, and they're gonna live with this. Like, this is the final version of the track that they're gonna put out. Like, and then that's not yours, right? Like, so, like, even though you may think like you know better, you don't know better, because that's not yours. So at least that's how I look at it. I could be totally wrong, but that's how I look at it. It's not my track, so why would I know better than the actual person who made it, right? So I have to be very like sort of mindful of that. And so as much as I want to share in these accomplishments, I don't really think it's fair for me to, because it's really it's their work, it's their accomplishment, and I'm just sort of helping on the ride, sort of thing.
Yeah, sounds like you got a professional mindset. That's awesome.
Yeah, cool. Trying to, because that was the other thing too. I remember when I first got into the engineering thing, I used to see people who would work with other people in their studios, and then that track that I know was a solo project turned into a collaboration somehow, right? And that never really like sat well with me. You know what I mean? Because like if somebody's hiring to work with you or whatever, like, they're hiring you to provide a service. I don't necessarily feel like they're hiring you to collaborate, right? A collaboration would be a natural thing that you both, you contributed with, but if you're adding stuff after they hired you to just do a service, and then you turned it into a collaboration, which I saw some people do, like in long time ago, and very not like anybody recognizable, just people working in bedroom studios and things like that. I just thought, that's not what I want to do, and I wouldn't want to also scare people away from like wanting to work with me because they think I'm going to take ownership, things like that. So I was very like, I just want to be the engineer. This is your track, like, appreciate, if you just give me the mix credit, master credit, that's cool with me. Like that, I don't need more than that, and that's kind of why I'm very much like, I try to draw a certain line there where, as much as it is an achievement or something like that, it's really just kind of other people's, and I'm glad to have helped them,
So speaking of mixed credits, I'm not always the best about telling the label if who mixed the record. Like, it's not because I'm like trying to like hide it or anything like that. It's just that after months of it, the project being over, and then like I'm trying to take care of all the admin. So if I have ever like not giving you credit, or if like somehow the label didn't get the message that you were credit, big apologies right now.
Oh no, don't worry about it. Honestly, that wasn't that wasn't a big thing for a while, right? Like, just recently they started tracking the credits. For the most part, I relied solely on like people posting it, right? Like, if you posted it on your socials, and they would be like mixed by whatever, that was good enough for me, because there wasn't really much of a tracking system outside of, I guess, Discogs, if you were even posting the stuff there. But yeah, I don't take that too seriously. I mean, I try to like, always tell people if you can, but they, there's so many things that contribute to possibly that not showing up that I don't really take that too serious anymore. Honestly, everybody knows what I've worked on, and I usually am pretty adamant about posting it up also myself. So, I'll just say, hey, I mixed this one or I mastered this one, and that usually that's kind of what gets me to work, right? Like, that's kind of why sometimes it's important, but that's why I tend to just like put it up myself and show, like, and I always tag the artist and make sure people know it's their work. I just mixed it or mastered it. But yeah, that's been just the thing that finally came around now. Thank God. Because it's crazy, right? Because I remember when I got into this, the reason why I got into this, because I started following engineers on records. I would see repeated names and be like, damn, I love this record. Who mixed this, right? And I would look at the record and I'd be like, damn. So then I'd be in a record shop. If I saw that guy's name again, I'd be like, oh, I'm going to pull that record out. Even though it wasn't the same producer, I'd be like, man, I like what that guy did on that mix. I'm just going to check it out. Maybe it's, and a lot of times it would be a record that I was really into, right? It just happened to be the engineer that piqued my interest, right? So funny enough, like, at one point, we didn't really have that in the digital era. You didn't know who mixed what or who mastered what unless they were saying it on their own socials. And finally, now we have that. So it's kind of cool that now we've come full circle to the point where moving forward, we could actually look at engineers and be like, oh, I wonder who worked on this. And, because that's literally how I discovered my heroes.
Yeah.
That's how it was.
It'd be like Martha Wash, like,
yeah.
not getting credit for singing on a record.
Exactly. Exactly. Yep.
Oh, yeah. So, do you have any projects coming up that you're really excited about?
Not too many I could talk about, but I know Rissa just posted about her new EP coming out soon. I think I can mention the Mobby album, and it's this incredible Latin band. It's a 2-piece, and they produced it in the Dominican Republic, and I got to master that record. That was last year.
Nice.
It's supposed to be coming out this year. I'm really excited about that one because it's a completely different style of music, which is what I'm trying to do now, is like venture a bit more into other genres, not just dance music, as much as I love dance music. But yeah, I would say
that's probably a good segue for that because of all the percussion and drums and
exactly, yeah. And that's how it felt too, honestly. And it was cool because then afterwards, a couple months after we had mastered that, I got to see them play live somewhere here in Brooklyn, and I was blown away, like how good they were and how good they represented their material in live form with just 2-piece. Because it's like a full production in the album, but the way they were able to play it live with just a 2-piece just blew me away. So yeah, I would say those projects, as usual. Rissa, the homie, and that Mobby record. I've been doing a bit more DJing lately. Like I said, I took a little bit of a break from the studio just to decompress a bit, and now things are starting to come in. So it'll start to pick up now that I'm looking at my list now. But yeah, it's we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Well, good on you for recognizing that you needed that break and that you were willing to take it. Because sometimes, like, we don't take those breaks that we need, and so that's awesome that you recognize those signals and
like
just took that break.
Mental health, right? Like that's become such a a big topic, and rightfully so. I think for so long we've kind of just carried on, especially like depending on your nature. I feel like us New Yorkers, man, we just grind and continue grinding, and you kind of have to like take a quick step back, and just recollect your thoughts sometimes, or just take a break. Honestly, that's kind of. And it's funny because I felt guilty. I felt like I was being lazy. Like, what am I doing? Like, I should not be doing this, right? But it was exactly what I needed. And now I feel great, and I'm starting to take on projects, and I'm attacking them like I normally would, as opposed to feeling slightly heavy about it, or not feeling like I have 100% that I could give to this record currently in front of me. So yeah, I think like taking care of yourself in that regard, like I said, doing those physical activities too, not just like staying in a static position, always sitting down doing the same thing. It could really be harmful to you, your health. Just getting that blood flowing with a quick walk around the block even will help. So even the mind too. I can't believe sometimes, like, because I won't leave the house for like 2 days because I work from home, right? So like, let's say I don't leave home, and then I go outside, and I'm like, oh my God, I needed this. I can't believe how much I needed fresh air because of this era that we're living in right now, So I don't know.
I work from home too, and I'm just like, I'm at the point where I like have to schedule in like times to go like step around the clock just to get outside. Just be like, set reminders on my phone or whatever to it's time to get outside of the house, like you said, because it could be like days at a time where I don't leave or whatever.
And it's crazy, right? Because I coming from the era of going to work every day and then leaving work, then you could hit the happy hours, socializing with your buddies or whatever, and then heading home and doing the creative stuff. That breakup, I can't believe how vital it was. Like, as much as the idea of like going back to an office is absolutely not, like, I'm not into it, but there was something about that contributed to the mental health of like, all right, I feel good, I'm seeing people, talking to people, getting fresh air, leaving the house every day, sort of thing, but
that compartmentalization, like, so like, I mean, even so I work from home too, but I've got like my I had everything kind of on the same table, and I had this KVM switch to like go between my work computer and my home computer. But I actually set it up so that I have a separate desk now for my work, and then a separate desk. I actually have like a little studio desk for for my music, and those kinds of projects. But even that small change just made a huge difference in like, okay, this is my work time over here on this side. This is my music, space over here, and just that shift. I mean, that made a difference. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like getting outside and like having that breakup between the day, and like, yeah, there's definitely a case for that for sure.
Yeah, it's so funny you say that because when we moved into this apartment, it was we went from a 1-bedroom to a 3-bedroom, and finally, my girlfriend was able to get her own office, and then I was able to get my own studio. And because she doesn't really work from home anymore, I actually use the office, so I'm able to break up the monotony of like being in here all day to being in an office, feeling like I'm changing my setting from one part of the day to the other. Because man, I can't tell you, like, I used to sit in the same desk all day, all night, and that was just, I can't tell you how horrible it was after a while, where I just felt like, my life consists of like 6 feet, it's just like, what am I doing here? It's brutal. Yeah. So I'm with you on that. That's a huge, huge benefit once you have the space.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's see. It kind of feels like we're kind of naturally coming to a close of the conversation. Is there anything else that you would like to leave listeners with? Maybe like some tips for mixing, or for people who want to get into mix engineering? What do you think?
Yeah. I would say, if I could talk to myself 20 years ago, the first tip I would give myself would be to focus on learning how to listen and spend the money on good speakers first and foremost, right? Treat your room, get a good listening environment, and get good speakers. Everything else, I feel like, won't have as much of an impact on your overall sound when you're mixing as those two things, right? So, if you're able to just do certain things to, treat the acoustics in your room to give you a bit more of a flat, accurate response from your monitoring, as much money as you could possibly spend, depending on your budget, get the monitors that you feel is, right for you sonically. And then, learn how to really mix and EQ and listen. Like, it took me a while to like learn what the compressor was actually doing, right? To really notice what it's doing and things like that. Perfect example is earlier today when it was like peak reduction and you heard that stuff when I was laughing. Can you notice that when it does it subtly? Things like that you want to sort of learn and use it in a way where it's actually contributing to your song and not destroying it. Because I can't tell you how many times people are just slapping things on without knowing what these things are doing, and they're all kind of consistent, right? Every reverb has a wet knob, every reverb has like a time knob and all that stuff, right? Learning what those things do, the attack, release, all these elements, like what does the EQ do, what does the high pass, all phase, signal routing, all that stuff, like you want to make sure you're connecting the dots, because eventually that will inform you to do the best work you can do without even thinking about it, right? Eventually it'll become like a second nature, muscle memory thing that you're just actively doing these things because you know what they do and you're just picking the tool you need at the moment to execute your idea. I would say those would be the biggest tips. And use your resources out there. There's so many resources like Mix with the Masters, Pure Mix. There's podcasts out there that are extremely informative with interviews with engineers. Resources like Pensado's Place, which is free on YouTube. Can't tell you how much I learned from that man. Yeah, there. And then just real life mixing, right? Like, don't get so obsessed with learning everything. Sometimes you just have to do it, and then you may have to do it incorrectly for a long time until you get it right, right? Like, it's the same thing with DJing. I remember, like, it took me almost a year to finally get like a beat match, right? Like, and then finally I was able to like all I was DJing and mixing records together. But prior to that, I was train wrecking my ass off, and it took practice. Same thing with actual mixing. You're gonna make some terrible sounding mixes with horrible low end that you can't hear the highs, or the highs are too much and there's no low end. Everybody's gone through it, so don't ever feel deterred if you start listening to playback and it's the worst mix you sounded. I've had many of those myself, so I would say those are the biggest tips.
How does someone go about training their ears, like in an intentional way?
Well, now before I couldn't even tell you, man, because that's what I struggled with, right? Now you have tools that could, flatten the response of your monitors. And then when you're listening in that environment, that's when you could really train your ear, because you're listening to an accurate representation of what's being played back to you. That's the problem with most of people's mixes when they first start off. What you're hearing isn't exactly what you're going to get when you print the mix, right? And it's because you're probably hearing all sorts of things that are happening in the room that are not a part of the mix. The monitoring could be inaccurate. Like all sorts of elements could contribute to you just thinking you have a great sounding mix in your room, and then when you play it back in your car, it sounds like crap. So those are the things that, you kind of want to control. So like, for instance, tools like SonarWorks, they have the flat response for your speakers or your headphones. So once you're working in a flat environment, now you're accurately hearing what you want to hear, what is there, and then you can mix it, right? Like, I think one of the biggest things that I heard from a well-known engineer was you can't mix what you can't hear. So, and that's true. There might be so much stuff going on in your mix that you can't hear because your speakers can't give you that information, or because the room's not tuned, you're not hearing that information quite right, and then, off we are with a sort of a bad mix to boot. So I would say, like, the biggest thing is to learn how to train your ear in a flat environment, not a completely dead environment, but an environment that's accurate enough for you to tell this is what the compressor is doing. This is what that 3 dB boost at 4K is doing. Is the de-esser hitting the S's enough, or is it too much? These things you need to hear it. That's why I always say, like, the monitoring in the room is, for any engineer, is probably the biggest thing, I would say. And then everything else comes. I wouldn't have spent as much with some of these early purchases if I would have known that. I would have focused everything on the monitoring in the room.
Got it. Okay. So stock plugins will work for a while.
Dude, I can't tell you how many mixes I've seen done with stock plugins. They're fantastic. Like, you don't need the fanciest stuff, I'm telling you. Like, I did a mix the other day, and I almost felt guilty on how little I used of all these fancy plugins, but the track sounded great, and the artist was really happy. And I'm like, all right, awesome. I didn't use any of these fancy ones. I was just all Pro Tools plugins, and I never do that, like, never. And I love the results. So it was like, who cares? He's not seeing that, or, he's not, like, worried about that. You just hearing what you're hearing. So if you're able to get great results off of stock plugins, absolutely stick with it. Yeah. It's cheaper too.
Sweet. Good plan. All right. Well, let's see. I think we're actually at a close now.
Cool.
I'm not very good at that, so I've been getting better with my hosting skills a lot, but I'm not really good at ending things.
No worries, man.
I feel like it's just like a cliff.
We just fall off. I'm going with that.
Yeah. So yeah, all right. Well, I really appreciate you being, coming on it, being a guest and sharing.
Of course, thank you for having me.
And it's been a great conversation, and I've loved getting to know more about you because we've worked together and done some music projects together, and we chatted online a little bit. But we have really had a conversation, in real time.
Yeah.
So
appreciate it.
Maybe a phone call once. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was it. It was just a phone call. Yeah, for a mix. Yep.
Yeah. So no, this has been awesome, and I would encourage people to. I'm going to leave links in the show notes and the description for you. I would encourage people to reach out to Carlos Ruiz, or AKA Ruez, to just if you need a mix done, get your mix on over to Carlos.
Yeah.
So
let me know.
And tell people what your company name is. And then
it's just called Ruiz Audio Engineering. It's just my last name. Okay. But pretty straightforward. Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Thanks again, man. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. Have a great weekend.
You too.
Take care.
Bye.
Hey, friend. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. As producers today, it can be really overwhelming to keep up with all the tasks that we need to complete. So I've created a free toolkit that can help you. Call it my release roadmap. This tool helps you to gain clarity on all of your tasks related to music production, demos, releases, and social media so that you can spend more mental energy on making music. Learn more about this free roadmap by visiting tonyfuel.com/roadmap or click the link in the description below. Again, that link is tonyfuel.com/roadmap. Take care, and I'll talk to you soon.